Hey class, and welcome to Comparative Politics. We are beginning our third and final unit of the course where we're going to focus on what I would have called in the good old days the Third World. What we are going to call here in our increasingly sensitive and liberal terminology of today's era, the Global South. Okay? I suppose this is a less pejorative term. We all know that if you live in the United States, living in the Southeast is about as bad as it can get. So to me, there's some connotation with the South, implying that you're sort of backwards or impoverished or what have you. Okay, so with these sort of confusing remarks out of the way, I think that we're trying to be more sensitive with the term Global South. But to be honest with you, I don't really know what the term means, because the nations that we're looking at today aren't all necessarily, they tend to be grouped in the South. Of course, we didn't refer to this as the advanced Northwest. So, there's some, pay attention to the terminology. In a sense, it doesn't matter. Understand what you're actually analyzing, but also understand that in many cases, the authors of textbooks or lectures in this case may have their own sort of ideas or ideology that's fueling where they're going. And I think this becomes particularly evident in the communist and third world sections of our textbook. If you haven't picked it up, the author of this textbook is going to be fairly sympathetic to the idea of socialism or communism, and he's going to be fairly hard on especially the democratic portrayal of privatized markets and etc. that we see in the United States. Okay, and I'll encourage you to look for some of this stuff in some places. Okay, a good example that you've already seen would be his handling of the term totalitarianism. You study Arendt on this and see how it's perhaps the most evil and despicable form of government that has ever been created by a human being. Yet to him, this is should more properly be called democratic centralism, and the term totalitarianism is something that has been applied to this form of government by critics of it. We should all be critics of totalitarianism after we've read Hannah Arendt. Oh, by the way, while I'm on Hannah Arendt, why don't any of you choose to write about her in Test 2? I find this frustrating. This is the meatiest, this is the tenderloin on the carcass, and you guys are leaving it there for the crows. Another way of making a metaphor here is, look, those are difficult waters to navigate, but because people don't go there, that's where you're going to catch your biggest fish and find your greatest reward. If you guys take on the challenge of analyzing Arendt in your essay in Test 2 and getting to some of the deeper points regarding the differences between communism and capitalism, I don't think I saw much analysis, if any, of Havel either. So these were some of the deepest and meatiest portions that you should have been talking about on your test, and many of us chose to ignore it and leave it there. So across the board, this is one comment I have on our test, is that we could have done a better job of handling the challenging stuff. But that said, I'll also say I think many of you did a fairly good job on Test 2 of understanding and articulating the fundamental differences between nations in the first world and in the second world. With the one caveat that we perhaps could have done a better job of explaining how institutions actually work, and especially both Russia and China. How exactly is the Duma a veneer for a rubber stamp Congress? How is it a veneer? How is their one-party system playing into this in Russia? And same in China. How does the government work? There are no elections. How does it work? This is something else that was just sort of left on the table for many of us. With this said, though, I think we got the basics and did a fairly good job on test number 2 there. Okay. So test number 3, to circle back around to what we're talking about today, is going to cover this Global South or Third World. Okay. The first thing I want to point out is that this is not a homogeneous group of countries. In the previous 2 cases, we could look at the influence and heritage of a Locke or a Hobbes on capitalism and democracy, or the influence of a Marx in the idea of communism. Third world nations are scattered throughout the globe here, and in many regards you're going to find some tensions between the first 2 units that we've studied. It's not going to be uncommon to find socialist influences in these third world countries, and to also find capitalist influences in some of these third world countries. Okay? Now, moving forward, to give you a sense that this is not one homogeneous swath of third world nations, we'll begin our studies with India. Notice on the Freedom, they're green here on the Freedom House scores, meaning they are free. They score well. Yellow is partly free, and purple is not free at all. Okay, so from a 0 to 100, India scores a 77. U.S. is an 89. So they're almost up to par with America in terms of freedom in India. The second nation that we're going to look at is Iran. They're scoring a 17. Somewhere between Russia and China, okay? So a big difference in terms of culture and what this culture means for the political institutions that get put into place. Big difference. Finally, we're going to look at a country that's kind of right in the middle here. Mexico will be the last country that we look at this semester, okay? So 3 more countries to go here, and then some work on tub-dub and a final exam is effectively where we are, okay? Now, for your Tuesday assignment this week, I want you guys to read the textbook chapter on this global South and to answer the reading review questions that I have posted for you. I'm not going to do too much of a lecture on the global South, other than to speak to some generalities that will emerge in the textbook chapter that I want to make sure that you can focus on. Okay. All right. So first and foremost, one of the things that you're going to see is a colonial legacy or a heritage of colonialism in these nations, in South America, in Africa, and in many parts of the Asian Pacific Rim here. This is indeed going to be true. Okay. Now, the way your book is going to articulate this is that because there's this heritage of colonialism during the colonial days, many of these current independent nations were set up simply as functionaries for the host nation. Wealth would be extracted, and it would simply be used as a place where you could extract wealth for the host nation. So for this reason, many of these economies are going to be well behind by the time we get to the era of independence, and this is going to happen sort of slowly across the globe in no real organized fashion from the late 1800s up through the mid 20th century. Okay. Now, because of this time frame, and especially regarding the concept that these nations are going to be gaining their freedom, and then they will be free at the height of the Cold War, another sort of important dynamic that's going to be playing out here, and which will affect the tensions that you should end up seeing in these series of lessons, meaning that you'll see some heritage of socialism or communism and some heritage of democracy and capitalism, and some sort of tension between them, right? This is occurring because at the time that these nations are trying to make an identity for themselves, the United States and Russia are competing with one another to be the global hegemon. So there's this fundamental fight between capitalism and communism to determine the shape of the world order in the 20th century, when we are really developing these nations. Okay, so the history is going to matter here in terms of the bigger scheme of things. You have a legacy of colonialism, which is going to make these nations quite poor and in need of development out the gate. They're going to be looking to the world's major players, especially the United States and Russia, to help them get ahead and to catch up. And as these nations will be playing the United States and Russia off of each other to get caught up, what you're going to see is one, that these nations are struggling to catch up and they remain quite poor, and two, the two dynamics that we've already focused on in this course are going to kind of be butting heads in a meaningful and real way in these lectures. Okay? All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop off here for my Tuesday lecture. Again, this is just speaking to the sort of to the basic dynamics that we should be noticing as we proceed here into the third unit. One thing I want you to take a little bit of care with as you do your review questions is to focus in on the aspects of economic development. Focus on things like import substitution, all right, and things of this nature. What are the specific ways in which these smaller, newly independent former colonies are relating to and relying on the first and second world nations, which they are trying to play off of one another. Okay, believe that's all I want to say here for your Tuesday lecture. I also want to throw in another quick reminder. If you are not putting a little bit of effort during the week to study TubDub and figure out what's going on this archipelago, you are doing yourself a disservice. Here in the near future, I'm gonna give you your sort of formal assignment for TubDub. In this online format, this is something that you're to be studying up on independently behind the scenes as I give you my little lecture videos, and you're studying these countries more or less independently on your own as well. Okay, but don't neglect that one area here. Alrighty, so that's your third world, your global south, generally speaking in the broad strokes. Your next video for Thursday is going to cover India, which is really an interesting nation and really gets at this tension that I'm talking about. You'll see very clearly in there Western influence as well as socialist influence. And more remarks on that coming up in our India video.